to close down the economy if it doesn't get its way. Does Wall Street play any constructive role in the real economy?
It does provide the means of payment, like credit card. It used to be that the government would provide the currency, and when people would go to the store, they'd spend currency. But now they spend credit cards, and Wall Street controls the credit cards. The government has let the money creation function and the money transfer function out of its hands to be privatized. So you have the credit card companies that are now charging up to 30% interest, and they make even more money on penalties and fees than they make at interest, even with their 30% rate. So you've given this sort of toll booth fee, this rent payment for money, over to Wall Street. Yes, people need to use some means of payment when they go to the store to buy groceries or buy other things. Wall Street supplies that. People need to have bank accounts. They need to have somewhere to save their money. Wall Street supplies that. But in the last few years, ever since Clinton, and essentially most of the problems come from the Clinton administration, not from Obama, not from Bush, but from Clinton, and his repeal of Glass-Steagall in 1999. What happened is that these commercial banks that in the past provided these basic services, checking accounts and normal credit cards, have all become financial parasites by merging with predatory real estate lenders, predatory investment bankers, and they've become something entirely different from what they were 10 years ago. So the problem is that over and above, wrapped around these basic essentials that banks provide, they've all of a sudden taken on their basic identity from more and more parasitic, purely extractive activities that don't add anything to the means of production or to the real economy, but merely siphon off, rake off charges and fees for everything they provide.
I'm speaking with financial economist and historian, Dr. Michael Hudson. Today's show, Obama's Republican class war presidency. I'm Bonnie Faulkner. This is Guns and Butter. Now, you mentioned that Americans could, if they so chose, walk away from mortgages that are underwater, that is, mortgages on their homes in which they owe more than the property is now worth. But I read in one of your articles that you say that Europeans don't have that option.
That's right. The American law is pretty unique. During the Depression, it's obvious that if you had people having to pay the mortgages on their homes, you'd have most of the American public in the 1930s would have had to pay all of their wage income for the mortgages. They would have ended up in debt peonage. So America and various provinces of Canada got rid of the personal liability for mortgages, just like a corporation or a real estate owner can walk away. Europe doesn't have anything like this. And almost all the European countries, if they don't pay their mortgage, they're personally liable for the difference between what the bank can get for the apartment if it forecloses and what the mortgage is owed. So I, for instance, talked to people in Latvia. And one woman, for instance, had worked for a charitable foundation there. She lost her job as part of the Latvian budget cutbacks, and she couldn't afford to pay her mortgage, so she tried to sell it. But the apartment was only worth maybe 30% of what she'd paid for it. She can't move out because if she moved out, the bank would sell it, and a Swedish bank has the mortgage, at a very low price, and then they'd have a claim against her income for the rest of her life for the equivalent of 70% of the house value that simply isn't there, and she'd be working the rest of her life to make the bank whole on a mortgage that it never should have made in the first place, because it didn't really care how much of a mortgage it gave, because it knew that it could essentially turn the mortgage borrowers, the homeowners, into a debt slave. So the girls tried to take in other women as roommates and still can't pay the mortgage. And this is a situation that's the case throughout Latvia, Iceland, Hungary, all of these countries where the real estate bubble has burst, and people owe a lot more than they can pay. The thought is that for the rest of their life, they're going to have to not only pay to live somewhere else because they will have lost their house, but over and above the money they pay, they'll have to pay for the old mortgage on their old house, and there won't be any money left to break even for food, clothing, or other. So Europe now looks like it's going into a chronic depression, and that's one reason that the euro has been going down in value, and why other currencies, no matter how bad the U.S. economy is, other currencies, sterling and the euro, have such even worse financial system that they're all going down together, which is why European and American money managers are all putting their money into Asia or third world countries where they don't have this kind of debt peonage.
Yes, you write that New Europe's debt strains are threatening to break up the core euro currency area. Could you explain that?
Well, right now, a condition of joining the euro by the post-Soviet economies and by Iceland is that they maintain a stable exchange rate between their currencies, which are still local, and the euro. They'd planned on joining in a few years, but now, all of a sudden, they're unable to pay their mortgage debts, and almost all of the mortgage debts and business debts owed by these countries are owed to banks outside of these countries. For instance, the Soviet economies like Latvia, the Baltics, didn't have any banks of their own when they achieved their independence from Russia in 1991. So they had essentially foreign banks came in. And the Swedish banks came into the Baltics. The old Austrian banks came into Hungary and Central Europe. And so these countries owe a lot of money to foreign banks. They can't pay. They're defaulting, and the only way that they can pay these banks is by borrowing from the European Union or the International Monetary Fund. Well, the EU says that in order to borrow, they have to cut back their spending on hospitals, cut back their schooling, cut back their public spending, and this is leading not only to economic shrinkage at home, but to emigration. In Latvia, for instance, the lifespans have shortened by 10 years since independence. There were 200 hospitals at the time of independence. Last year there were 7. The IMF says that's too many. Now you can only have 3. You've got to stop your emergency service. There's no money. So in order to pay the banks, these countries are having just to act as brutally as a military invader would act. And that's why in Russia, President Putin said that the effect of the Clinton-Obama team has been as damaging to Russia as all of World War II. In World War II, Russia lost 20 million population. It's lost more as a result of the Rubenomics neoliberalism, more tens of millions of people than it lost in all World War II through shortening lifespans, suicide, declining health, heart attacks, brain seizures, diseases of economic tension associated with poverty and economic polarization. The effect of neoliberalism has been the effect of war. So the Americans, having won the Cold War, now want to destroy these economies and destroy the population, and the way they're doing it is through the same neoliberal policies that this team is now imposing on the American population.
Well, right. I was just about ready to say that's what they're doing to America as well.
Yes. So the anticipation is that lifespans are going to shorten here. You're already having either an emigration, or the first line of it is re-emigration of immigrants, immigrants who came to this country for jobs. For instance, Indian computer programmers in Silicon Valley are moving back to India. Chinese graduates here in the sciences and biology and physics are going back to China. You're having a reverse immigration from here. Just as in Iceland, for instance, the first effect of the austerity, even before the Icelandic young people began to emigrate, was the foreign workers went home. Same thing in Ireland. before the Irish have begun to emigrate again. They've sent all of the Baltic workers and the foreign workers home. So you're having this demographic effect beginning in the United States that you've already had in the most seriously indebted European economies.
What do you think of Iceland's refusal so far to repay the loans of the Icelandic banks that went belly up?
These were